Patricia said, Lynn just wrapped up a 3-day workshop here. Well, actually up in Gettysburg. Lynn is a master pastelist with the Pastel Society of America. She's an IAPS eminent pastelist and member of the Salmagundi Club of New York City. She's founder and past president of the First Coast Pastel Society in Florida, and is a Southeastern Pastel Society master pastelist. She founded a pastel society, so she understands why we went through this exercise today to get input from you all. Oh, thank you. Patricia came up with it. She's got award-winning artwork that appeared in shows across the United States and also in invitational exhibitions in France and China. She's been an artist in residence for the National Park Service at Acadia National Park in Maine. And she's featured in many books and magazines. And you're working on a new book now, correct? So, so keep your eyes out for that. She now lives in a small village in Maine, but she used to live in Florida and one of the Carolinas.
In
Western North Carolina. She's inspired daily by new landscapes and changes in the season. She's a Unison Color Associate Artist representing the Unison Handmade Pastels, one of my favorites. Well, they're all my favorites, but I really do love Unisons. And she's got she's developed pastel sets for Jack Richardson Company. So go to her website, read more about Lynn, look at her artwork, and enjoy the demo.
I won't wander. But I decided to go ahead and paint something from home for y'all. Coming out here, though, I've been looking at all these fields and these barns and these things like this, and I'm so tempted to be outside painting out here for you. So, so what I'll do is I'll kind of roll through the way that I approach a painting. Working from a photograph, for me, is always a little bit different. I spent an awful lot of time working outside, and I think that if you are interested in landscapes, to me, that's the core of everything, is being outside. So working from photographs for me was always it always felt a little constrained. But over the years, I decided that I would try to find ways to utilize those photographs in a different way. We take a photograph and we tend to want to just paint exactly what we took. And so rather than do that, I'm always cropping and shifting according to the intent that I have for that piece. And before I ever start a painting, I'll sit and I'll spend time with the image that I have, and I'll try to decide what made me take that photograph in the first place, what I felt in that place, what I want to say with my painting to whoever looks at it. And then I begin a series of props, trying to hone in on the parts of that painting or the elements that are in that painting that best push the idea of what I had in my head for my intent. And as I told my workshop students, I said, you know, really and truly, if you are just painting an image because you have a nice photograph of it, it sort of takes that little part of your soul that was there when you took the photograph and says, here, go sit in the corner. I'm just going to paint the photograph. So I'm always trying to get people to hone in on what the intent was there. So when I look at this image here, this is a place that I walk past probably 3 or 4 times a week. It's a little place called Kresge Point, and it's in the photograph. To me, it looks small. It's very, very expansive. You stand there and you look down these rocks, and this is quite a ways out there. So when you're working from a photograph, there's a lot of things the photograph will do that will kind of bib to you. It's going to pull everything in the distance up closer. It's like your mirror on the side of your car, you know? So it's pulling things closer. It's changing the color of things. So to me, that gives me leeway to do whatever I want to do with that photograph. It's just a reference with a big old capital R for reference. It's no more than that. So looking at this image, I started to think of words, and I do this a lot. So depending on what I decide to choose as an intention, the words that I want to convey, that changes the way I crop a photo. And when it comes to cropping a photo, I made a point of this in class the other day as well. I don't really ever care about the proportions of a normal piece of paper or a frame. And I'm always kind of saying to people, we don't frame every single thing that we do. So if there's a format for this painting that makes more sense to help convey that intention, then cut your paper. Have it framed. If it comes out to be a really good painting, you're going to frame it anyway. So it doesn't really matter. But if it comes out to be a so-so painting, you're going to put it in that pile in the back of your studio and stack it up, and it's never going anywhere, so who cares? So when I look at this, I came up with a couple of words just so that I could describe this to you. So if I was talking about, these are my lovely cropping strips. If I was talking about what it feels like, if I wanted somebody to know what it feels like to walk along the edge here, if I have all of this going on here, it's distracting as all get out. It makes no difference. It doesn't need to be there. If I want somebody to get that feel of walking along this edge, I may take this whole thing and I may crop it back into something here so that that becomes more important in that painting. If I want to talk about the cragginess of the rocks, the shapes of those rocks, if that's what I want to convey, then all of this over here is extra. I don't need it. And if I crop it in, I might want to work in a square shape where I'm pushing somebody's eye toward this and making them really see these striations in the rocks so that they're not distracted by all of that nonsense going on over there. The word that I was thinking of, because this space to me, it's always a place where I go and I stand, and there's actually like a great big rock here, and I'm usually hanging out there with my lunch, but it's just expansive. To me, it's a place where I can sit there and I can look out over the trees and the ocean and all of the things that I love to see. And so the word that I want to aim toward today is expansive. And so something like this crop doesn't really give me that because I don't get this big expanse here, okay? If I crop over here, I might get more of the ocean, but then I never get a chance to play in those trees, and I don't get a chance to really look through them. They just become kind of an extra mark up at the top there that's distracting. So when I'm working on this today, my thought is that I'm going to be working somewhere up in here where these striations of the rock will lead me back here. But if I open up the spaces between those trees, I really get a feel for this sense of standing there and panning that horizon. This, I don't have to copy that exactly the way I see it. And if I want somebody to feel what I feel out there, maybe I need to mow down a little bit of this and let them look through them. So I start to think about all of those things before I even get started with the painting. Then I start to think about things like color palette and how I want to use color to go ahead and push that same idea of expansiveness. When you think about it, if you're looking way off into the distance, is something that's off in the distance as detailed as this? Does it need to be? Absolutely not. So these are things that I'll shift and change as I make this painting. I'm not going to put all this detail in here because what it's going to do is it's going to draw my eye to here, and I'm going to be playing around in here, and I'll never get past it off into that horizon line. So they're fabulous because they're this natural push toward this. But I also like that there's little bits and pieces of islands dotting the horizon back here. and it makes my eye move this way across that expanse. If you're painting one of these fields or a marsh or something where you want to control where your viewer looks in that painting, if I decide I want to paint a big field and I want it to look massive, and I cram it into a 9x12 piece of paper, it's always going to look tight and cramped. It's never going to allow that viewer to look at it and just scan that horizon the way you would if you were actually standing there. So why not do a great big long panoramic of that and allow that viewer to do this with his eyes? Okay, so these are the things that I think about before I even get started with a painting. It's how I kind of organize it in my head. And I think about what is going to remain in that image, what I'm going to take out, what I'm going to push back, what I'm going to pull. There's not going to be anybody else that looks at this painting that's going to be standing right there with me in that spot and going, oh my God, there was a rock there. You didn't put it in your painting. So who cares? Nobody cares. You can move it. You're the boss. So I'm going to change some of this, push it back a little bit. I'm going to trim some of these trees out, and I'm going to prop up into here somewhere so that from the very get-go, we're working our way toward that horizon and utilizing that horizon as our kind of goal line back there, the place that we want everybody's eyes to go in this painting, okay? So I start to think about color palette. It's really obvious here that there's blues, there's greens, there's yellows, there's the rocks, they're gray. That's okay, but I want to push it a little further. If I want to push somebody's eye out to the horizon, what happens with a color the further back it goes? It gets more purple and then it gets more what? Blue. Our eyes can only see colors that have red in them to a certain distance. And past that, we can't see that anymore. So if I want to really push somebody, I have to blue everything out toward that back end here. And I have to really push toward those blues. And that is going to allow me to push their eye back into the distance. So where there's a lot of dark here, I may shift that. I may not use that dark space. I may lighten that up just to make it feel like it's back. A lot of this in the photograph looks like it's necessary, but it's dark because it's wet. It's not dark because it's a great big dark space. This is out in the open. So we read it as some kind of hole in the rock, but it's not. It's just wet and there's seaweed on it. So the photograph, again, is a big fat liar. So don't listen to it. Go ahead and use what you know in your head and use the pieces and parts of what's in your image to create what you want to create. This is why we're artists, because we get to create. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to work with that. A lot of times I will do an underpainting with like liquid pigments that I have. I think today I'm going to do an underpainting with hard pastel and water. But I'll show you these just in case, because these are fabulous things. If you like to do watercolor underpaintings, these are pure pigment mixed with water, and they're super intense, and they can go on as thin or as thick as you want. They don't fill up the tooth of your paper, and they're really wonderful stuff. They're something that I started using them years ago, back when Kitty Wallace was making paper, and she suggested these all the time. And the colors are just beautiful and big and vibrant. So I'm going to start out with, sorry, oh, pure pigment. Yeah, it's by a company called Createx. And so you have to get it on their website. It's called createxcolors.com. And you have to search pure pigment, or else you'll end up with airbrush colors or other things on their website. They have this is a very small part of their site. But anyway, I'm going to start out with this with hard pastel and water. I may or may not go into these. I don't know. I'm one of those painters where once I start, I go off like a squirrel. So be prepared, because I may change my mind 47 times while we're working. So we're talking about pushing into this kind of blue distance here. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna tape off some of the bottom of this so that you can see a bit of where I'm cropping things. And I hope all of you out here can see, I don't know if you can see the reference. I'm gonna go here. Yeah, I think that'll do it. I think that'll give me the opportunity to push this back a little further and use these. There's something I have to think about though, as I even begin to start this, and that is that I want your eye to scan here. So these are naturally going here. So I have to really think about value structure back in this area to push my eye around so that these don't become just an afterthought. So I can use things like the cloud structure in the sky to help with that. If I'm thinking about this type of day, and I'm not going to get into any kind of big atmospheric weather conditions with this, then it's going to be kind of a quiet day and the water's going to be sort of quiet. I think with this particular scene, if I want this to be about the expansiveness of this area, I don't want to get into a bunch of wave action here because then it becomes about the waves. Okay, so I'm going to keep this the way it is. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'll show you how I start, how I build up the underpainting part, and then we'll kind of move through that. So we have, I'm not sure how much time we do have. Where did
We have plenty of time until 4. We have to be out here at 4.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Oh, now you're all stuck with me, but that's what I want. Okay. So when I started painting, I tried to think also about the horizon line. The horizon line is really, really, really important. I don't know if any of you saw that movie. It was about Steven Spielberg, and he was growing up, and it was called The Table Horse. But at the end of that movie, if you ever get a chance, look up Last Scene with John Ford in The Fabelmans. There's a little bit of swearing going on in there. I'll warn you ahead of time. But basically, Spielberg is young, and he gets to walk into the office of John Ford. And John Ford is famous director John Ford. And there's paintings up on the wall. And Ford looks at him and he says, he says, "Why are you here?" And he goes, "Well," I kind of says something like, "I want to make movies," or something like that. And Ford goes, "Oh, you do?" He says, "Oh, so what?" And then he says, "What do you see about that painting?" And he says, "I see like a hill and a thing and a whatever." And he goes, "No. And he gets all upset and he says, "Where's the horizon line?" And he says, "The horizon line's up here." And he says, "Yeah, it's interesting." He goes, "What about that painting?" And he says, "There's like a whatever it is in that painting." And he tells him what's in the painting. He goes, "No." He goes, "Where's the horizon line?" And he says, "It's down here." And he goes, "Yeah, that's interesting." And then he goes, "And what about that one?" He goes, "It's in the middle." And he goes, "That's boring as." And he says, so it's that idea of making something more interesting. When you cut a horizon line right in the middle, which is what your eye does when you take a photograph. So when you go looking through your camera, you're going to find that all your horizon lines are right smack in the middle. You have to decide what's more important, the top or the bottom. Okay. So if I want to push you back here into this distance, I have to raise that horizon line. I have to create a way for you to walk into that painting and get in there. If I pull it down low, it's all about the sky. So right now, the horizon line is right about here. So it's a little bit above center on this drop. So I think I'm gonna try to raise it up to about here. So I always make little marks. I use a darker pastel than I need because I think about things like the shadows that I see in between things. And that to me is what your underpainting is basically for. Is to create those places that you're going to get big and bulky with if you're trying to dig in there and get a pastel stick in there and make that. So one of the things I'm going to do first is I'm going to kind of decide where I want that horizon line, which I think is going to be right up about here. I want to think about this little point. I want to kind of think about the way that these rocks come out and push me back in through here. I want to think about where these trees are going to be. So I've got rocks kind of pushing me off into the distance here. I can actually move these and push them a little bit that way. A little bit of this piece here coming over. I have some rocks down bottom here. I have all these little trees. So I talked also about taking those trees and leaving more gaps between them. So I want to be careful not to get too heavy right off the bat with the trees, so that I'll be able to put some sky holes in there. So I'm going to leave a gap here. I also don't want to try to crowd those trees down. I want to allow my viewer to see those trees as being off in the distance, but large. So got places where this ground plane starts to shift and change.
Karen, are you using a black pastel?
No, this is a dark blue. So this eventually will end up being a little bit more ambiguous than what I've got up here. But I want it dark enough that I can see what I have going on. I think it's really important to evaluate what you're doing at every stage of the process. So as I'm putting these marks in here and sort of figuring out what I'm doing, I'll also be taking time to step back and look at this from a bit of a distance. So when I look at it from here, I want to know that my eye is going to move all the way across there already. There's going to be a little bit of an island over here. So even with that small mark, if I back up, my eye is still scanning that horizon. I don't feel like it's getting stuck anywhere there at this point.
In
So
fact,
if I know that my eye isn't sticking here or it's not sticking here, if I realize that my eye is already getting moved around, then I know I can keep going.
is that a hard pastel?
This is a hard pastel. Yeah, I don't know if you can you see it?
Yes, thank
A little
you.
piece of it. So next thing I do, once I have this laid in and I can see kind of this map of what's going to happen, then I start to add more of the blue. And I think about things like this mass here, to me, is a really hefty blue-green. That's going to need some color. This here is a big mass that if I want to achieve something that kind of resembles green, if my underpainting is blue, I can use golds and yellows on top of that and make some much more sophisticated greens than if I just look in here and pull out the poor sad green that doesn't go with anything. So I will start to fill in some of these areas. These rocks are granite. They have texture to them. They reflect a little bit. If I leave them the color of the paper here, because they're light, I'm gonna be fighting that color to get to this light color of the rocks. So I'm going to make these dark. And then I'm gonna work light colors over the top of it. So this stage is where I can see what's happening. The next stage is where I obliterate everything, okay? So I warn you ahead of time. So I'm going to tap in some more of this. And I'm also going to go ahead and start doing this. I always think about the direction of the thing that I'm painting. Grasses are up and down. If I'm doing this, and even a little bit of that underpainting shows through, that mark catches your eye and your eye reads it as something wrong or incorrect or messy. So I'm always thinking about the direction of the thing that it is that I'm working on. The other thing is that when you lay out that little map, it's almost like training your hand as to where things are on the paper. So, question of the day, is it important for me to go all the way to the edges with everything? Not always. We have this lovely tendency to want to paint all the way to the edges, and sometimes that's not necessary. So sometimes in my paintings, the underpainting will be what's happening down here. And I'm making marks to indicate what's happening, but I'm not getting fussy in the corners. Something to remember is that we see things the way we see photographs. I blame Ansel Adams for all this. All of a sudden, photographs are detailed right to every edge. And all of us have grown up looking at photographs and assuming that this is how we see the world. And it is absolutely not how we see the world. We look out, we look at that tree, and everything around it is a blur, and the tree is focused on. So when you're worried about going, oh my God, what do I see here? Do I have to have that? Stop it. Don't worry about it yet. Worry about getting your painting to move you in a direction. But don't worry so much about all of those little details all the time. So this, I'm making a mark here because I want to remember that this is where this falls off a bit. So at this stage, it's all about the movement. It's all about where I'm pushing your eye. You, as the artist, get to manipulate your audience. It's the only time you get to be manipulative, and it's not a bad thing. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wash some of this in now, just with water. And I'm probably going to use what's left of the water to wash in the sky up here. Yeah.
What kind of paper, if I may ask?
Oh, sorry. I'm working on UART 400. Yeah. And if anybody has questions, don't be afraid to just blurt them out. It doesn't bother me a bit. All right.
So you've just used the same color.
Sorry?
It's the same, you've used the same color pastel for the entire sketch.
I'm doing that with this one, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
because there's an awful lot of these kind of dark cracks in between everything here.
Okay,
And this is a lot of yellows and greens, which I can pull out of a blue. And then these are a lot of blue greens. So to me, that's the underlying color for everything in this painting is that deep dark blue. So I think about, again, direction. I'm not going to go like this.
and this is water, not alcohol.
I'm just using water. I don't have alcohol with me, so I'm just using water.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not real fussy with those things. Anything liquid will do. The only thing I would say, if you're using water and you're working on UArt that isn't mounted, just don't overdo it with the water.
You, mount your software for your husband, your.
Both. This is a piece of a panel that I got from Dakota, and it's just cut down to size. When I'm working at home, usually anything that's maybe 18 by 18 or less, I mount myself.
And what you use to adhere it.
I use this stuff called Graphics Double Tack Mounting Adhesive Film. GRAPHIX. And you can get it at a few different places. I get mine from Blick. It's kind of like contact paper. You know, the double-sided paper on it.
What do you mount your work on it?
Gator foam, gator board, or this was mounted by Dakota, and they mount it on 8-ply museum board. And so that's what this is on.
Then can you give us the name of that double text?
Yes, Graphics, GRAPHIX, Double Tack Mounting Adhesive Film. It's good stuff, but I warn you ahead of time, if you do something big, it's squirrely, so get used to it on a small piece of paper. And if you do something large, have a friend with you holding one side, because it's way worse than waxing the hair off your arm. Just be forewarned. Because I have done that before.
And you mount it, you said gator board, but anything else?
Yeah, sometimes I'll mount to, if it's not too big, I'll mount to acid-free foam core. If it gets too big, it'll tend to bend. So I prefer the gator board for that. So as I'm doing this, I'm still thinking about direction with all the marks that I make. So every mark that I make, I'm considering the direction of the mark. Somebody yesterday was asking about trees and the edges of trees. And so a lot of times I'll kind of make these sort of pouncy sort of marks around the edge, because that helps to give the tree some edges that are that aren't too sharp. Eventually, as I go with the tree. So these are not looking overly pine tree-ish yet, but they will. Now I've got a lot of this on my brush, so I want to get rid of some of it before I start with the water here. So I'm going to use it for the sky. So basically what I want to do here is I really am just trying to cover some of the lightness of the paper. Personally, I don't. I do know a lot of people who do, and they really love it, but it's never been, I like this part of it. I feel like it kind of allows me to work my way into it. And I just prefer it. I tend to be, when I'm doing a demo, obviously, I'm working really fast, but when I'm home in the studio, I'm a pretty slow worker, and I tend to use a lot of hard pastels and build them up and build them up and build them up. And so for me, it's kind of a little bit of a struggle to use a dark paper. All right. So this is when I step back again and say, is it still doing what I wanted to do? And yeah, I think it is. So even though I just kind of got started a little while ago, we're going to take a 5-minute break. I'll let you get up and move around because the next stage I'll be up here for a good long while, and this needs to dry a little bit more. So we'll be back again then. Somebody just asked me if all my paintings, underpaintings are monochromatic. No. The way I look at underpaintings is that I feel that every single painting deserves its own underpainting. So when I decide what it is that I want to say with the piece and what I want that piece to convey, that helps me choose what I want to do with an underpainting. For example, with this one, it's going to be fading off into the distance. It's going to be kind of bluing out a little bit. When those things happen, I like that monochromatic underpainting. I see this blue in all the shadows here. So to me, that monochromatic underpainting is helpful. If I'm painting something that has a lot of texture in it, a lot of grasses maybe, or a marsh or something, I may use complementary colors. For example, if I am painting a marsh and I want those golds of the grasses to really pop, I may use like a red violet underpainting, and then I might use something totally different for the sky or for the water. And so depending on what it is that I want to say, that's how I choose my underpainting. So for this one, I feel like this is kind of it's sort of in a way it's a rugged scene, but it's kind of a quiet scene. And so if I have a lot of things, like a lot of, if I had a different color up in the sky and I was using a complementary color in the sky, for example, that's beautiful if I want that to feel sort of bouncy and light, but I kind of want it soft and quiet. So I'm going to stick with a soft and quiet underpainting. Okay. So
Karen, I was surprised that you made the rocks dark, but I see where you're going with it. You're going to add the lights on top, and it's going to give them quite a lot of depth.
yes. So I don't know if you could hear, but what she's asking about is, she said she was surprised that we did the rocks dark, but that the light that comes on top of them, when I add to it, it'll give it depth. It'll give it depth, but it'll also give it texture. You're working with textured paper. So that's part of your painting. Use it. So if I want these rocks to have some texture, if I have a dark underpainting and I just skim a light color over the top of that, that's almost all I have to do. So you think ahead a little bit into these areas. So I am going to throw on a glove and get started. I don't know if y'all, I use gloves occasionally. When I'm home, I don't use them. But if you're looking for gloves that fit and don't dangle into your painting, if you have a Walgreens nearby, Walgreens carries vinyl gloves that come in 3 sizes. So you can get them to actually fit like a glove. So these will go nowhere and I can do whatever I want to do. I can even go back and use my computer. It doesn't matter. And these are great. So it's a little plug for Walgreens, I guess. So a lot of times what I do is I try to start by identifying areas where I see light and areas where I see dark, which is not usually how most people start, but that's how I start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a couple of hard pastels and I am going to just start touching in some places where I see light. So I see a lot of light hitting here. Remember, this area here is not going to be as dark as it is here. So I'm going to keep that in mind. That's going to be fairly light. These are dark. This is light. I've got light here. Down here where it drops down, it's darker. I've got light here in my water. So I'm going to just start touching in a little bit of light. So at first it seems very minute. You don't really notice it. But as I move on with this, you'll see where it's going. So, oh no, I'll tell you as I go. I forgot to do that. This is actually a really pale orange. It's a pale kind of pinky orange. So if you see these rocks, there's some cracks that run horizontally like this. So I can actually start to develop those early on. By leaving the dark of the underpainting there.
So using your pattern of brush strokes, mark strokes that you made, and when you painted to now you list the lights and you're using the same section as the direction.
Yes. So for those of you on the camera, if you couldn't hear, the question was, am I using the pattern of my brush strokes to kind of identify what I'm doing with the marks that I'm starting to make? And yes, I'm doing that as I go here. So some of these, because they're longer, and this is a couple inches long, I'm using them, I'm just moving it this way rather than dragging it down. This is interesting because it changes back here and it's got this really different little pattern. So I'm going to try to identify that. We have really great geology where I live. It's very different from other places. It was all sediment that laid like this and then got pushed up and shoved sideways. So a lot of the rocks, when you're walking on pieces that are about that wide and they're just big, long strips of it. But it makes for some really great textures. So this is kind of how I start to map out more of what's happening. And again, I'm stepping back and going back and forth, trying to make sure that everything is still doing what it's supposed to do at each stage. There's nothing worse than doing a whole bunch of stuff up close and then you back up and it's all wonky and you have to make up for it. So this was a kind of a light peachy color. Somebody asked me during the break about trying to, we were talking about the color palette that I've got here. I'm not one of those painters who will put very often my sticks along here so that I know which ones I used. I can't be bothered. I just want to paint. So I will be putting things back in the box as I go and sort of working from there. I'm gonna work with a lot of the local color here today, but I am gonna push this back. So I'll be working into some golds and greens and dark green blues and things like that. So I have areas here where I start to see that sort of yellow from the goldenrod that's growing there.
Kathleen, are you using Giro pastels?
Excuse me, what was that?
Am I using Jura? Is that it? Jura?
Oh,
Is that what you asked?
Is it a Giro pastel?
No, this is a hard pastel.
Oh, okay.
This one is, we were talking about this in class. This is a Carandash hard pastel. They're getting very hard to find. You can find hard pastels at Richardson. There's new pastel now that's out there still. But a lot of this is just hard pastel still. So this kind of starts to give me a little bit of a color sense. And am I trying to identify exactly where these things are here? No. I'm putting them where I feel they should go. I'm kind of making it up as I go. I'm more worried about this working than being accurate with this. I want to add in now a little bit of the blue-green for the trees. I'm gonna start getting that in there. So a lot of times I'll build up with the hard pastel because I can lay it on there really, really thin. And so I'm gonna build up a little bit more and then I'm gonna give you a chance to kind of just file up here and just walk by and see how little pastel is on here because there's very, very little on there. I think what I'm gonna do for this here, for the trees, is I'm actually gonna use kind of a really dark blue-green, and then I'll adjust it as I go. So this will be kind of how I start these, and they'll change as I continue on. The last thing you ever want to do with a tree is to try to squish it down and make it fit inside your painting. Let it grow and let it keep push it up and out of the painting. As I'm looking at this, there's a lot of grasses here, but I am going to I kind of want like a little piece of rock over here. So I'm gonna identify that now and see if I keep it later. I'm gonna just put a little thing there. These rocks, as they move back, we talked about bluing them out some. So I'm just gonna throw a little bit of blue back here just to get that started. Also, know your nature. The rocks that are here near me are granite. You have granite rocks here. Most granite has little bits of mica in it, so it reflects the sky. So if I'm gonna have some blue in this sky, it's gonna reflect a bit into some of these rocks along the way. Sorry? This is just kind of it's a hard pastel. It's kind of a little bit more than a light blue. So at this stage, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of starting to build a color palette. I'm starting to look at what I want in this. And there's not enough pastel on here at all to worry about changing this color if I have to. But yet it starts to give me an idea in my head of what the color palette is gonna morph into.
Okay, so you're working from light to dark.
I'm sorry?
You're working from light to dark, or you're working.
What I'm doing is I started out with the really dark underpainting. And then I'm using some lights on top of it to kind of identify where light hits things. So these rocks have a lot of light hitting. These yellow areas here, there's a lot of light hitting. These are upright, so they're very dark. So I started to add some dark blues in here. These are down below. So I'm kind of hitting those with a little bit of a lighter kind of neutral, almost a brown, to push those down a bit. So I'm just trying to start to create a little bit of form. So because I have light and I have dark on each, say, let's just use a rock, for example. At this point, because I have dark here and I've put a piece of light here and a piece of light there, it creates a crack between the two of them. And I can start to create form. Okay. I'm using hard pastels because I want to be able to see it begin without getting that tooth full. So what I want you to do, because I think this is really important to see, watch the cord and don't linger up here so that we can keep moving along. But just let's start with up here and just come on up and walk by and take a peek at how little pastel is in there so that you can see what's happening with that.
Next year of the rocks and paintings, the ones.
Oh, thank you.
I won't say a word to other people.
Oh, good.
No, it doesn't. Does it? No. Sounds good. What? Kind of looks like it, doesn't it? Those bars of rock there are the weirdest looking things, you know, with the lines.
Yeah. It's so directional.
Thanks. So it gets better as it goes. It just
Want a close up of this. Interesting position.
Good. Yeah. This is how I get to take a break out of the water.
See how it goes. Fingers crossed. You have to stay something Mine are Karen Dosh and old favorite pastel, but you can't get many of them anymore, so. Yeah.
Now my daughter,
There you go. And it's now. Yeah. I know you are so formal.
That is stunning.
There's
Just stunning.
We got so much. It's all
It's amazing how much definition there is of how little pastel. I mean, especially up here. I mean, I think that must be the secret. Diving right in. Like,
so I have it. All right. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started again in about 1 second.
Wonderful. So subtle. It's like
Touch.
I'm sorry. Yeah. It's funny how different it looks from way in the back.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, it does. You really see all that texture. You see how subtle the colors.
That's my favorite part. It's like magic.
all right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started again. If you wanna come back up. So normally, if I was in the studio, I would continue on. I have in my studio a box that's maybe that long, that's all hard pastel. And I like to just build and build and build and build. But since we don't have 3 days, I am probably gonna use a little bit more hard pastel occasionally, but I'm gonna go ahead and start with the soft pastel so that we can start really building this up. So one of the things that I want you to remember is that as I go, I'm gonna be just randomly grabbing colors that I think are kind of close to what I need. Do I ever hunt and peck and try to find a color that matches up here? No. And the reason I don't do that is because what's happening here is not the same as what's happening here. And so it does me no good to try to match. Okay, I'm looking for things that will create the illusion of what's happening here, but that fit in this painting. So if I wanted to use this yellow, and I looked in my box and I tried to find a yellow that was close. Let's see. This one's sort of close. It's got to be a little bit more orange. I'm gonna go with this one because it's here. Yeah, this is the closest I have. If I'm trying to match this up and I put it here, it just looks bad. Okay, so one of the things I was showing my workshop students the other day was if I'm questioning a color, you know, instead of doing, I've seen 2 things that make me a little bit crazy. A lot of people will put a piece of paper and they'll test out a color. I hate to tell you this, but when you test out a color down here on a piece of paper, and then you put it up here because you think it's the right color and it's on top of something else or next to something else, it is never gonna look like what it looks like here. So to combat that, if you feel like you have the right color and you're not quite sure, put it in your hand, stand back, hold it up, and look at it. You'll be able to tell immediately if it's correct. If it's not, it's going to be glaringly not correct. So that's a good way to work on this without touching your painting, without putting a mark on there that doesn't belong there, and then having to regroup and start something over again. So I don't keep my colors in a tray. I don't take them out and put the ones that I use here. I just stick them back in there and I just keep moving along and choosing what I feel needs to be chosen. So I want to, because this is going to be light back here, I want to address the sky and the water so that I have a comparison here, so that I can actually work off of those things. I don't want to do this and then have to put a color in the water that's not correct. So I'm going to be working a little bit with all of them. So I think what I'll do is I'll lay in a little bit of blue. I want this sky to, I don't want like a really bright blue sunny day. I kind of want a soft day. So I'm going to just lay in some color and I can always go kind of dark to light. It's harder to go the other way around. So I'll do a little bit of this and then I'll keep adjusting as I go. I'll probably end up with quite a few colors in the sky at some point.
Lynn,
Yes.
I thought it was very interesting when you were referring to in our workshop about focal points and the need or the less need to really incorporate one. In this image, I have such a directional flow. I mean, they're really being brought back to the horizon line. But once you get there, I don't really see the focal point, but do you need one?
When you, so I have a good question for you. Now, I don't know if you guys could hear this on the recording, but she was saying, we're talking about focal points. And she said that there's a big directional flow to here. And so when you get there, what is there when you get there? So I want to know what you do. When you get to this point, what do you find your eyes doing? Thank you. Yes, that's exactly what I want them to do. So I want this to be the motion that we're encouraging. Okay, so I don't have anything going on here, but I want to be able to balance these things, large, small. I want to be able to balance these things and let my sky connect them so that you wander. The word that I was thinking of was expansive, which means you've got to be looking side to side and kind of wandering across that horizon. So, good answer. Can you come to all my demos and ask questions? Please. Okay, good, good. I like that. All right. I can also kind of encourage it a bit by the way that I treat the sky. I mean, normally the sky is lighter down by the horizon. So that kind of helps to pull a little bit. And again, I'm still working really, really light. And I guess light, I mean light with a light touch. See what this does with the water. I was just looking out here and there was this massive cloud that just came through. It was great. Now I've got a lot of green here. And I've got a lot of green because I'm gonna be adding blue over the top of that. I'm sorry?
On the water is green.
It's a blue-green. Yeah, I'm gonna be adding more blue to it though. I kind of wanted that sense of, you know, when the waves, even if it's like a quiet day, there's always a little bit of movement. So I sort of wanted the green underneath so the blue can skim over the top of that. So just kind of taking it real slow with that green. I'll get some big rainstorms here. This is, so a lot of times I am holding my pastel stick on its side, and what I'm doing with it is I'm kind of trying to imagine where my hand would go if I was sort of skimming it over the top of something that's here. So I'm kind of trying to follow the texture and the shape of things. I'm kind of glad that you guys have me doing this today and I'm not on a plane today in this. Thank you. I'm glad. So now if I lay a little bit of blue over the top of this, and some of that is coming through, some of the paper is coming through still, I kind of get a little bit of that sort of light on the water. It's too dark. When you make sky holes aren't just random. If they don't make sense, then they look like you're just dropping color on top of things. So you always kind of have to try to think about the shape that you're moving around. So if I'm moving up next to a tree trunk and there's a little branch there, I have to think that out. Otherwise, it just looks like you're dangling ornaments off of your trees. Or those plastic Easter eggs or something. Now I want to start pushing on my pastels a little bit. So I'm going to start making some more intense moves with this. So I have to really think about the colors that I'm going to use. So this. So here is the thing that always happens. We do a couple of things like this and we think, ooh, that's working. And so then we go over here and we do it over here, and then we're gonna do it over here, and we do it over here. And the minute you think that you should do it in like 27 different places, you have to really learn to slap your own hand and say, enough is enough. So color shifts and it changes, and if it's all the same everywhere, it's gonna look odd and repetitious, so you don't want that.
Are you still working with hard Joe?
No. No, now I'm working with the soft pastels. So what I'm thinking about here with these rocks is I'm thinking about the fact that there's kind of a soft sky. It doesn't have really bright, intense light. So there's not really going to be a place on those rocks. They're going to have light on them because they're basically flat on the top. But there's not going to be that real strong sense of warm light versus cool light. So rather than try to push it in the wrong direction, what I'm doing is I'm choosing colors that are similar value-wise, but that, like, here's a green and a blue. Those are a little bit cooler. These are kind of a peachy orange. That's a little bit warmer, slightly warmer than these. So I'm going to try to create that illusion by using similar values in those, but just leaning toward warmer or cooler. So like right here, this feels like it leans. I'm going to add a brighter, warmer color next to it to pull it back up. And all the while, I'm looking at that underpainting as if it's the cracks between the rocks.
So then this is interesting because it is a similar color scheme to the ones you demonstrated yesterday in the workshop. It's not identical.
Yeah.
But I'm feeling like that orange against that like blue. And obviously it's done by you and you have your style, but it's probably also your experience of the place coming through.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole time, it's funny because when I paint places that I know real well, the whole time I'm painting it, I feel like I'm standing there and I know exactly what I'm looking at. When I go places that I don't know well anymore, I mean, for years, I would take this whole setup and I would take my easel, I would take the whole thing, I'd get set up and try to paint, I'd paint something that was horrible. And I think, oh, God, it's so frustrating. I'm traveling, I want to paint, I want to do this. And I stopped because I thought the reason it's terrible is because I don't know this place yet. So I started bringing like sketchbooks and gouache, and I'll sit and I'll spend 4 hours getting to know what I'm looking at. And then the next day I'll go out and I'll paint. And that makes all the difference. It's like you have to get to know it and to understand it and to feel it and the whole thing. So
Yeah, it seems like your painting will really devote the space much more than we started out.
I hope so. I hope so. I think the thing that I really love most about painting is the idea that it's your interpretation of a place, no matter what you do. So. You hear this? This is a hard pastel again.
Could I ask, do you normally work with thumbnail sketches to set up your composition and colors, or do you do as you did today?
Okay, so the lady on the thing was asking about thumbnail sketches. Do I normally do that? I used to do thumbnail sketches all the time. And now I just sort of see things on the paper and I just work with with the image on the paper. And that's just my own preference. Doing thumbnail sketches for a long time was really a wonderful way to get to know parts of the landscape, to get to know the shape of trees, to get to know the way that like notans, the way that the darks and lights set up in a place. So I can't really emphasize that enough. I think it's really important to do them, but I think that there comes a point where sometimes you don't do them as much because you trust your own instincts on the paper after that. But it gets you to that point. It allows you to better trust your own ability to do to just go directly onto the panel or the paper.
Great, thank you very much.
This is really dark over here on the left, and I need to get that lighter. But what I'm doing here is I'm adding a bunch of blues so that when I start to put yellows over it, it's going to kind of give me the illusion of a green over there. So I'm doing this kind of for a reason. And this is the kind of thing where if you think it out ahead of time, you can kind of reason out in your head what's going to happen next. It looks terrible at this stage because the values are all off and everything else. So so that's why I'm putting those things there so that you know what's going on with that. was telling everybody the other day, I said, I get nervous up here when everybody gets really quiet. Y'all are doing it to me again. In class, I was afraid I was gonna turn around and everybody would be asleep. So seriously, don't feel bad about asking questions if you have them.
Is it some light blue you're adding?
This is actually a blue-green. So it's leaning a little more toward the green than the blue. Now I've got a lot of stuff going on in here. So far, I know what I want to do with it, but these need to be. This is when I have to start addressing those trees a little bit more. I'm ignoring them a little bit, and they need to be a little more fleshed out. So we're gonna work on those a little bit. So try to find a. Don't want something too dark. This blue here. So it's kind of a bright blue that I'm using here. Right now, I'm kind of making a trail this loop. I will show you why. 1 minute. So I want to keep my eye moving. So I'm kind of leaving a color trail to get up to these trees. But I also want the light on the foreshortened parts of the tree to start to build up. Right now they look a little flat because they're all dark. But there's always branches that come toward you, and we tend to forget that. So that's where there's going to be light hitting those branches. Everybody good out there? Check in. Somebody have a question? My silent demo. I hear that. Oh my God, my biggest fear. Oh my goodness. So this is always the big disadvantage of doing a demo is you're condensing everything you want to do into like a couple of hours and you're thinking to yourself, but you know, if I had 3 more hours, I could do this, or if so I'm always trying to get the biggest things I can in here first. Got to step back and kind of evaluate. Okay. So when I step back, I can see that this is really pronounced here. And I can see that I've got kind of a straight line running here. So these are things that have to go. They gotta get out of there. So, and the other thing is that these value-wise are very similar. So I need some breaks there. So let's address those real quick. Get that fixed. I'm kind of debating how much of that I even need back there. This is the kind of stuff that I really like the hard pastels for because I can just kind of tap in some lines and adjust a lot of things with them. Amazing how little pastel is over here still. There's I'm really hitting a lot of the paper there, and there's not much. There's not much at all. There's something about this that's really bugging me, and it's lifting up. So it needs to lay down, and it's let's try this. It needs darker in the back. So what y'all got going on later on this afternoon? What I want to do is I want to get that sky and the water a little more resolved, because they're just kind of, the paper's coming through an awful lot. See what we can do there. You are very patient. So right now, I want to get a lot of these sky holes in those trees, because I think it's important to have spaces by them that will allow your eye to move back and forth. So try to get a little bit more of that opened up.
Earlier, you talked about the invisibility of the, where everything's converging.
This point,
Yeah, but I'm wanted to find out about the base of the trees, like that, you know, the way it's, wrong.
Here,
Yeah, like,
so there's grasses up there. And the reason that I moved that up there was only because I was using some of it elsewhere and I thought it might pull my eye around. I don't think it's gonna stay that pronounced. I think it's distracting, but I like that it will be eventually sort of background for something. So once I get these little sky holes in here, then that'll be a good time to take a look at that and sort of evaluate whether or not it's helping or not.
Take pastel off.
Sorry?
Pastel off.
Off the painting, like glue it off? Sometimes, but I try not to. When you do, it always makes a spot on the painting that doesn't go with anything. So one of the things you can do is if you really have a problem, you can take a piece of really sticky tape, like packing tape, and just go and pull it. And then it won't mess with the tooth and it won't mess with the surface. Instead of, like, I used to take a brush and try to brush it out, then you get that, you're pushing it into the surface and changing the nature of that one spot. So, everybody want to take a break for a second? Yeah. Okay. I need to think about this for a second before I like get into the final. Good state. So. Do you?
yeah, I mean, it's, you know, there's so many variety. It's not very easy. Yeah, it's only, there's like one of those clubs that's super personal. Yeah, so.
Hey, Kathleen, are you all taking a break or something?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Thanks.
Yesterday in class.
Those rocks are different than over here. Definitely. Oh, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Yeah, they were. It's such a, it's a beautiful work. Yeah. You know why? It's like this. Yeah.
All right. We are in the final stretch here. We're going to buckle over all our chairs pretty soon, otherwise. All right. So, having stepped back and taken a good look, there's little things that I need to address at this point. I need to resolve the sky because there's just way too much of the original paper showing through. Sometimes I like that, but in this case, I'm not that happy with it. I need to resolve a little bit more of the water. There's little places here where I need to resolve the lay of the land, actually. So I'll be working in here. And then I'm going to be adjusting color a little bit, things like that. Adding in a little bit down here so that you can tell that there's water going on down there. So this is when I get into the last little bits and pieces of things, trying to get this whole thing to just get cohesive. There are parts of this that I feel like are pretty much finished already. A lot of the rocking through here, I feel good about. I feel pretty good about most of the trees, but I want to get more sky behind them. Originally, we talked about that word expansive, and I wanted to be able to see through those trees so that my eye can read that horizon line. So I think like there's a little bit unresolved up here. So this is where, and even here, I don't really even mind that. It's very ambiguous at this point, but I don't mind it. And so once I start working the water around it, that'll tell me what I need to do with that section, okay? It needs to be there. At one point I thought, oh, maybe it doesn't need to be there. But if I take it out, it's all about this. So I think this is a really important piece. It just needs to be resolved in some way, but I also don't want it, it's a point, it draws your eye, and I don't want it to be too much. So that said, I'm gonna try to get a little bit more color into the water right now. Kind of like the light on the water. So I think I'm gonna every once in a while, I'm not a finger blender, but when you're using a paper that like 320, 400, 280, those papers, especially if you do an underpainting, it sort of tends to allow a lot of that texture to come through. So when there's just a little bit too much of it, I'll sometimes stick my fingers in and just push a little bit. This even so is still, look at, I'm pushing, it's not doing anything. So it needs a little bit more happening there. Bless you. It's like the rain stops, the sun comes out, and everybody starts to sneeze because all these trees are blooming, which is wonderful. Remember how I said I can always go dark and then lighten it back. Sometimes if you're trying to just do something that's a little bit light and you start to pull back on it, you're gonna get too much happening. So a lot of times I'll do something like this, and then I'll go ahead and I'll find something just a bit lighter and I'll try to pull it back that way. So I'm thinking, maybe a little, let's see what this does. Oh, it's too green. I think it just needs more pastel up there. I think it's too, there's just not enough yet, so.
Then do you work much in the winter time for your outside?
Outside, I don't anymore. When I first moved there, I worked quite often. It's not too bad, really. We have a plein air group that meets all winter long. The only time they won't meet is if the temperatures are like below 0. But that's kind of interesting. I have Raynaud's, so I tend to not want to get out there and wreck my hands. When I first started painting, I took a workshop with a guy who does these workshops every year in New Hampshire, up in the White Mountains, and he calls them winter boot camp. And he won't even let you go unless you're willing to buy these sorrel boots that have like a 3-inch thick sole on them. And he makes you stand on like 4 pieces of cardboard, and you got to do the whole thing because he doesn't want people to get frostbite out there. But I had met him because I took a class with him in Charleston, and it was November, and we were out at Edisto Beach. And when I tell you it was the coldest I had ever been in my entire life, bar none anywhere. The wind was blowing. We were on the beach. It was 27 degrees. And he brought us all to the local Kmart because they were still around then. And he said, go to the hunting section. I want you guys to buy everything you can possibly buy in your size. So here we are all out there, like in like 14 layers of clothes, just trying to get, and my legs got so frozen that I got in my car on the way back to the restaurant after the day that we were there. And I had the seat heaters on. And I thought, oh my God, what happened? The seat heaters aren't working. 20 minutes later, my legs thawed out. It was crazy. It was the coldest I had ever been. So needless to say, I did not go to his boot camp. I was not subjecting myself to that nonsense.
What was valuable about that experience?
No, you know what I'm saying? You know, the good thing about that experience, I will tell you, was that at the end of that day, he told us all, he said, you all get one question. So he came up to my easel, and me being me, said, I want to know why art is such a big boys club, because all the big artists are guys. And I said, what do I do? And he says, when did you go back to painting? And I said, oh, I did. And he was absolutely right though. So he looked at me and he said, you got 2 choices. You can be a hobby painter, or you can get going and you can do this. And he said, that's your choice. So I had a 5-hour drive home, and on the ride home, I'm telling myself, oh my God, I have to do this. I have to do this. So that was what got me. It was the kind of kick in the backside that I needed to really make me work. So I give him credit for a lot of that, because
So how many years ago was that?
that was 2014. Yeah. No, I'm sorry, take that back, 2004. Yeah. Yeah. But sometimes you just need that. You need somebody to really tell you the truth and say, you know, this is what you want to do it, you do it. So this little point there is getting to me. I had a lady come to a workshop once and she had a ruler. And she would use her ruler on the horizon line every single time. And me, being the old middle school teacher that I am, would take her ruler away and she would get really angry with me. But when you look out at the horizon, most of the time, it's not straight. And straight is usually just the illusion of straight. So if you're worried about whether or not your horizon is straight enough, don't worry about things like that. So I think it's really important with a landscape painting to consider the way you make a mark. If I'm going here and I'm trying to come between these rocks, if I'm not conscious of this being a flat surface and that I'm skimming over the top of a flat surface, it's really easy to come around and just follow the edge of this. And that's going to make it lift up and it's not going to appear flat. So always think about what it is that you're actually trying to depict.
So did you just tell us that a segmented outline is the way to go rather than the full perimeter of the rocks?
Oh yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're doing. It's going to be a little different for each thing. But if I want to indicate a little bit of water here, bump it up against those rocks. If I was to just, there's always like a little bit of foamy water around the edges of everything. If I was just to follow the outline of this, it would lift. It would feel like it was coming up because the width of the line would be the same all the way around. But if I hold my pastel on its side and I move it around as if I'm laying it on top of a flat surface, it helps that pastel to create a line that has variation in it in the right way rather than just outlining. So right now I'm trying to be very mindful of that sense of skimming that horizon. So I'm gonna try to add a little bit to get my eye to go back and forth a little bit more. So a lot of times I'm just holding my stick as if I'm laying it down on top of something. So this is always to me like it's the fun part, but it's also kind of the crucial part. Like you don't want to, this is where you could easily get into trouble with what you're doing because you get excited about the end coming up closer. I'm just rocking the pastel back and forth to make small marks here. So at this point, a lot of times I get asked, how do I know that I'm getting close to being done? And I always think that there's a point where you notice that you start to slow down and your marks start to become a whole lot more controlled and a lot more deliberate. And when you realize that you're at that stage, that's when you should be really cautious about the marks that you're making. You reach a point where you don't want to be going back in and fixing or rearranging or doing things like that. And then there's usually a point also where you just all of a sudden realize that you're done. You make that last mark and you think there's not another mark that I need to make right now, and there's not another mark that's going to do anything constructive. There's something about this one spot in here I want to resolve. So this is when I really start to look and be really critical of what I'm seeing, which is something that I think is important for everybody to learn to do, is to kind of look at your work as if it's not your work. Ask yourself, what does it need? What's it doing? Where's my eye going? This is actually a pink white. Yeah. Diane Townsend makes a whole series of whites that are really spectacular. I always think of those as kind of like the last things they're usually put on a piece. Getting close.
Lynn,
Yeah.
so the texture of the water in kind of the foreground there. Now, everything you do is so deliberate, so are you gonna leave that with that texture and let it kind of imitate a little movement in the water, or are you just gonna leave that on?
I'm gonna leave some of it. That was the part I was just heading toward because it's almost, it's so much more than elsewhere that I want to tone it back a little bit. So even that is starting to feel a little bit more comfortable to me.
But it is kind of interesting the way it's giving that feeling, if that's what you want.
No, I do want
Of
that.
the
I just don't
water.
want so much that it becomes a battle with what's going on in the sky. So, but it's really, the texture is really coming through. So.
Then you speak to the question of the gap between someone who goes to a workshop, tries to gain all these tools, tries to remember everything with it. Like it's almost like we're holding on to all these formulaic kind of, okay, do this, do this, do this. And someone who is in your position, who is the. Do you understand what I'm even
When
asking?
do you get to be the one who gets to just paint? Is that what?
When do you get beyond the gap of like, being on
The day that you walk into your studio and you say to yourself, I'm gonna paint today just for me, and you just let yourself go. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but there comes a point where you've absorbed everything you need to absorb, and you have to start to trust yourself and just say, if I screw up, I screw up. Who cares? And the more mistakes you make, the more you start to know what you're capable of. So when that happens, all of a sudden you think, yeah, that mark is bad, but I can fix that. What if I do this? But that's, I think, when it changes is when you start to look at your stuff as you just start to play. You have to experiment, and you have to not be afraid to start building up that giant pile of rejects in the corner. I just think about those paintings as that's your credentials. That's what proves to the world that you've come as far as you have. If you go in your studio and you think that you've got to take everything that you learned at a workshop and tomorrow you have to apply it all, then you have to think that tomorrow you go in your studio and you just go, woohoo, I got 3 hours, I'm gonna play, and just do it. That's it. That's all there is. Because you spend all that time worrying about whether or not you learned something, or whether or not you absorbed it, whether or not it's gonna work for you or whatever. But every workshop you go to, you'll realize a little bit more that each instructor has a different way of doing things, and that your way of doing things is going to be different from each instructor. So you take what you can and play. So that's all I can think of. Yeah. I think it's all about, it's just all about being okay with what you do, you know? There's never gonna be that magic day. But there is gonna be that day when you do a painting and all of a sudden you realize you've been in your studio for 6 hours and you didn't even know the time went by. And when you look at it, you go, oh my God, did I do that? But that day will show up. And so when it does, then the next day you go in there and it doesn't show up again. But then the third or fourth or seventh or 12th day, you go in there and you say to yourself, ooh, there it is again. And then you know that you're kind of getting there.